Okay, let's go ahead and just dive right in and take a look at some of your final submission uploads. I did note that you did have a bunch of images in the whips that I didn't necessarily see in the Discord, and you had a bunch of, your normal maps and your just maps overall. So yeah, you provided a lot of content, which I really appreciate. And let's go ahead and just try to dive into these final renders that you provided, and go from there. And then if we need to take a look at some of the other extra content that you provided, we can go ahead and do so. But I want to dive in on some of here and just initially say off the bat, amazing improvement on the hair. I actually really love the albedo texture that you're getting. The color variation is really great, and I think you really tuned it in, especially from where it was starting, which it looked like it was just like a preview that you were placing in the viewport. Where here it's really starting to get refined and polished, and you're getting a lot of appealing things happening. Not only with like the albedo, like the main color map that you added, drastically improved it, but then the placement of some of the hair cards with the flyaways and the variation here, it's just really appealing, and I think you did a really excellent job on the hair. So great improvement, awesome stuff. Even just the final render overall, I think it's registering, just reading better. In general, you're having a lot more shadows, a lot more depth, and it's just reading a lot stronger. So great job, excellent job. I'm liking like the lens flare from the highlights of the metals, and just great job presenting. Excellent job with the lighting on the glasses and so on and so forth. And even when I'm looking up here, you're getting like these lens flares and chromatic arbitration and just some really fun detailed shots of your character. Really showcasing some of the material work that you did, some of the cloth, the marvelous designer, the metal work, some of the stitching, topology, the boot close-ups. I saw that this was a scan boot and you went ahead and polished it. I think that kind of workflow is great. It's really good to see in the whips. I wouldn't mind seeing it in some of the polish stuff where you do like the scan boot where it's, super scanned in, and then the ZBrush polish, and then the texture, right? Or the retopology, then the texture. Like seeing that little workflow on a still image in your portfolio would be really great and really strong, showing that you're confident and you're trying out different things on one character. That kind of stuff's really great to see. The behind the scenes, the whips sometimes can be really helpful in presenting your work. Why? Because it's answering questions that the interviewer is thinking in their head, right? Sometimes when I see a boot, I'm like, oh, that's really great. Did he sculpt that? Was it scan data? How much of it was all him? How much of it was by hand? And so on and so forth. What was his process? How clean were those bakes? How clean was the high poly sculpt? And so on and so forth. So being able to answer those questions ahead of time, like in your portfolio, is going to be huge. And so if you can do that, either via a blog where you're just documenting your progress, right? You're just posting these whips along the way as you're making the character, or you're just doing these little, presentation showcases of like the scan data, like the whip all in one little scene file. Stuff like that could be really great. But again, first off, excellent job on finishing the character. Being in sync, and the hair, again, really great improvement. That's always fun to see. Some of the presentation pictures that I'm seeing, like, I don't know if this is how you're going to present it in this order. What I would suggest you doing is getting your turnaround first, right? I don't think you have a full back or like a side, but getting like one image where it's the full character turnaround, like so, as a one. Right, so that you're saying, okay, this is the character, this is basically the front, the back, the side, right? This is my default character. Here's it for all its glory, right? Here's the main piece, and then you can kind of go in and dive into these detailed shots where it's a portrait, and then it's the under / up shot of the torso and arm, and then you have the detailed legs, and so on and so forth. So when you're going to present this on your actual portfolio, think about the order of operations, like, right, which one's going to be seen first, exactly what you want to showcase first. And this is actually a really great shot, really great detail shot. I actually really like this one a lot. So think about the order of operations, which one's going to get shown first, and so on and so forth. Before we dive into like details of like texture work and specific artifacts or specific shapes and forms, lighting and so on and so forth, let's go and look at your topology. This is the first time I'm seeing it actually. And one thing that I'm noticing, which depending on where this is where it gets difficult, because depending on where you're working, this could either be really great topology or just really bad topology. It could be really great topology because there's room for simulation, there's room for deformation, And depending on, like I said, where you're working, this is gonna be a really great thing because they can have corrective shapes in the rig, and all this topology is gonna be really great to sculpt cloth. Like if you look at actually one of the most recent games that just came out, which was the new Star Wars game from Respawn. Let me go and see if I can find it really quick. Give me one quick second. I probably should have had this up, but this just popped into my head. So if you look at Hano from Respawn, he recently just released some updated images of the main character from the new Star Wars, from Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order. And when I talk about corrective shapes and having that gridded topology, like the abundance of topology that you have, it's really great if you're going to be doing stuff like this, which is corrective shapes for the model itself. Because not oftentimes, like this cloth isn't simulated, it's all sculpted, which is really great with the topology that you have, because you're able to sculpt these additional cloth folds depending on the pose that he has. So the rigger will go ahead and say, okay, let me hand this off to the character artist, to the sculptor. I'm gonna give him the T pose, the A pose, the up pose, and he's gonna go ahead and sculpt the cloth folds where needed, and then he'll plug it into the rig so that it triggers when it needs to. And so having the gridded topology, the dense topology that you have, is gonna be really helpful for situations like this, because you're gonna be able to, when they bend the knee, you can actually sculpt the back of the leg folds. When she lifts her arms, right, you can sculpt the folds happening on her torso, and so on and so forth. So for that kind of topology and for that kind of pipeline and workflow, great stuff. You have enough topology to follow folds, to add additional folds, and to break where needed. So you can have flyaways, like you can add additional joints here for the animator to have secondary motions of the sleeve. So great job there. If you're going to a smaller studio, even as there's not really room for AA anymore in this industry. It's more of like contracted out studios. But if you're going to like a smaller studio, doing more of like console work, not necessarily high-end PC graphics. If you're doing console work, you might need to get rid of some of this unnecessarily edge work, just because this topology is more of like a sculpted topology. It looks like it's almost just Jyri meshed and then somewhat cleaned up, which isn't necessarily a good thing. This is like more of geometry that you get straight out of Marvelous, or just gridded, sculpted geometry, so that if I was to pop this into ZBrush, which I'm sure you know, subdivide it, you're gonna get nice clean deformation all around, which isn't necessarily a good thing for final in-game topology. So you might want to just keep that in mind. Maybe have two variations, or maybe from here you start working on your LODs. So if you're unfamiliar with LODs are, which at this point you probably shouldn't be, if you're going to import this character into the game, depending on the view of the camera, like if I'm this close on the character, I'm going to want LOD 0. The further away I get, LOD 1 triggers. I get further away, LOD 2 triggers, LOD 3 triggers, and so on and so forth. And so maybe have like 5 different levels of LODs so that you can showcase your ability to have optimized geometry rather than this gridded sculpted geometry, because this gridded sculpted geometry is great for the close-ups, for corrective shapes like I just showcased. But when you start to get further away from the camera, you're not going to be able to pull this kind of geometry off just because it's unoptimized. So maybe having reduced variations of geometry, showcasing your ability to create levels of detail, LODs, could be really beneficial for you here. So again, it's kind of hard to critique because it's great for simulation and great for corrective shapes, but not necessarily great for optimization or like the LOD level of sophistication that you may need. So just keep that in mind when you're doing this kind of gridded cloth topology. Also, these hands are getting really dense. You're having a lot of geometry to describe these soft forms. Like when you look at it in comparison to the shape and how big the cloth is on the pants, and even the density of like your forearm, arm shapes, this hand's getting really dense. I'm actually not exactly sure why. Like you're zooming in on a detailed shot here, yes. Maybe if this was a first-person shooter, not exactly sure what camera you're going for. If it is a first-person shooter, it might be adequate enough geometry. But even then, it may still be too dense. I'm not exactly sure. What camera are you going for? A third person? I brought this up in one of your students' classes. Is to really think about the camera. If you're gonna do more of like a Gears of War approach, where it's like this shot here, this is a perfect, almost perfect Gears of War shot, right? This is probably more like it actually. Probably the camera's a little bit too low, but it'd be top down. Like this is a great shot to start testing like the actual in-game camera, right? If this whole monitor is my screen size, your character's probably gonna be about here, right? So that's actually not, this isn't a great, or this isn't a bad example of a possible camera angle for you to go off of, right? So how much detail do you have in the back? It just details really nicely, right? I think you did an excellent job of topologizing the pants and sculpting that detail and texturing that detail where needed. The back's looking good, and the front's looking good. So I think your overall execution of detail is working out nicely. But the hand, I don't know if you needed that much detail there, right? Look how much smaller pixels. Like if this is a 1920 by 1080 screen, right? You cut that in half. That's about 500 pixels, right? Your hand is only about 100 pixels, 60 pixels. So it's extremely dense for like the amount of screen space it's going to take up, right? If I do zoom in and I end up having like a close up of the hand, it's going to be really nicely, but you got to kind of take in consideration of what camera you're going to be working with. And if it is first person, then why are your shoes so highly detailed, right? If it's going to be only, you know, from the middle of your leg up, why is your lower leg so detailed? So unless you're gonna have like a cinematic shot of the character stepping in, right, and then you have super zoomed in tight close-up of the boots. So figuring out where the level of detail for your character is or needs to be is going to be important for you. Again, before we dive into more specifics, let's take a look at this time scale thing that you have here. So it says you have 4 4K textures, which I did see. Face, upper body, lower body hair. I did notice that is correct. I did see all your maps, about 80K. I don't know if you posted roughly what your final topology count was, but 80K. I'm not gonna lie, this seems a lot more than 80K, but I could be incorrect. Actually, I don't think I am. It looks a lot more than 80K. It says roughly 80K, but it's probably around 100, 150 even maybe. I'd be curious to know what your final poly count was, but I don't think it's 80K. If it is, then good job, because it's definitely masked or hiding it from me. In the end, 62K faces. I'd be curious what your tri count is, your triangle count. So polygons, like the actual quad geometry, isn't going to be the final taken into consideration poly count. The triangle count is going to be what's taken into consideration. When your character model gets imported into the game engine, it gets rendered into triangles. Like every quad gets cut in half into triangles. So the triangle count is going to be more important than your quad count. So keep that in mind. That's why I don't hesitate from using tries in your model. I noticed in your topology, like your boot down here, it's all quadded geometry. Don't be afraid to cut some of these edges out. Collapse them and collapse them into triangles, because in the end they're going to be triangles anyways. Right, avoid triangles in the face if possible, but don't shy away from them. They're not a bad thing. Triangles could be good, especially when being optimized. Like if you're to make LOD 2 and 3 and 4, you're gonna need triangles, so don't shy away from those. Don't fear the triangles. They're good for you. Week 19. I'm not exactly sure. Are these hours? So like, did it take you? Are these dates? Are these the dates or the hours? I'm not exactly sure. I'd be curious to understand like your hourly output for these. So like, did your high poly take you 80 hours? Did it take you 2 weeks for 8-hour work days, 40 hours a week? 80 hours would be 2 weeks. So did your high poly model take you 2 weeks, 80 hours? Or did it take you longer? Did it take you a month, right? Did it take you, what is that, 60, right? How long did it take you hourly or weekly, right? Your low poly, how long did that take you? Textures, I'm just curious more of like a weekly breakdown, hourly breakdown, so that you can get a clear idea. For me, right, 2 months is what I say. If you want a super high fidelity character with marvelous designer, scan data, super cinematic shot based characters, I'll give you a month, depending on the complexity of the character, especially if they want like a cinematic character. If you're gonna be doing like LODs, especially for like in-game integration, understanding if it's going to be third person or for marketing or for cinematics is going to be important. So for cinematic characters, 2 months minimum, right? Just for a month for the high poly sculpting, because you're sculpting each individual props and layers, and it's just a mess. So a month for the sculpts, a month for the optimization, which takes into account the low poly, the textures, and so on and so forth. So figuring out your workflow and timeline is going to be important. Maybe make it a little bit more clear if you're going to showcase it, just because it's kind of hard to see here. And it seems like you did your high poly And then hair and glasses are separate down here. So I'm curious why your eyes and glasses were done separately. And then your render setup and lighting. So render setup and lighting is going to be really important. Overall, I think you executed it really great. And even from your previous work, I think this is your strongest piece yet. From your material definition to the actual execution and polish of your bakes and your high polish sculpting. Again, a lot of the stuff that you can improve on, since you know the pipeline from start to finish, and it's only going to get better and better every time you work on it, is like the overall pill and final polish and surface level details of a lot of the stuff that you're working on. Again, I think your organic faces and forms and structures could use some work. Great improvement on the hair. Great material definition in your texturing, but like that final polish of like how thin some of your materials are getting, or like your like when I look at this edge here, this form is getting really soft from and probably too thin for the cloth. Some of your wobbles, like this trim collar, is getting really wobbly, which could probably be cleaner just for like the design aspect and just clean silhouette. These lips, right? You can really work on your musculature underneath and your anatomical structures of your face and organics overall. Like look how kind of bald this is. So like actually blending in and figuring out the actual proportion, having a skull in here to figure out the thickness of the neck. Even just for visual appealing, making appealing characters. How the glass is sitting on the nose of the bridge is kind of floating here. I think the execution of the materials, right, and the topology and the bakes are great. But like if you look at actual glasses, it sits on the bridge of the nose, so it's actually kind of floating here. Those kind of minute details and like subtlety of where the actual pant seam is, right? Where the belt loops, where even if there is no pockets, you're gonna want to make sure that there's stitches here. You did an excellent job with the boot and these attention to the details of like the loops getting into the shoelaces and how the shoelaces actually belt looped. That's gonna need to be executed all over the character, right? The cuff, you did have the cuff, but there has to be like an additional seam here. You have the zipper in. See how this is overlapping? The bottom part is like overlapping the upper part, which probably shouldn't be happening here. So executing that better could help you out a lot. How the seam is kind of overly dressed from the Marvelous, like if her shoulder peaks here, this is where the seam should probably go, right? So this is probably overly dressed. It's probably loose fitting for the character, which could be fine because it is kind of post-apocalyptic cyberpunky, which could be a good fit. Bolts might be too small, right? When I'm zooming out, it's just super tiny bolts, so you might want to think about thickening some of those up. Again, belt loops and seams. The butt pockets of where it's actually placed on the butt, how long the pocket is. It's actually a really long pocket. If you were to look at reference, how the seams and pockets are actually constructed are completely different. This is like stitched on like the butt, whereas the pocket is actually a secondary piece of cloth, right? Seamed on as a pattern. So stuff like that, for that kind of final polish and attention to detail is going to be really important for you to take it to the next level. But like I said, from the other characters that I've seen to this character, I think you made a drastic improvement in every character that you make. You should think about that next level of fidelity. Maybe for you, you do a series of pants next. Instead of doing a full character, you just work on 4 different variations of pants and really look at the pants. Really look at where the belt buckle is, where the belt loops are, how the belt loops connect to the pants, right? And so on and so forth. Just so you can start to really pay attention to detail and get you to the next level. I think you're really strong for where you're at now, but the next level of fidelity is where you need to get. And you could definitely do it. It's just a matter of how long it's going to take you to get there, and how many studies you're going to do to get there. But excellent work, great stuff. Really liked how you finished the character off. Maybe think about putting her into different lighting scenarios. Get a ground plane, a shadow catcher, right, where you don't necessarily need to see the ground, but you can catch the shadow. Try some different like dramatic lighting, maybe a quick little 3-point light setup, a little quick key, a fill, and a nice rim. I'm sure you're actually lighting stuff here is getting some really interesting stuff, but I'd like to see some shadows on the characters. You can kind of see them here, but there's no hard shadows. There's no really soft shadows on her. So getting some shadows on the character, some more dynamic lighting to showcase your pieces could really help pull this off. But other than that, excellent job. Again, more clear definition of goals and time sets to how long it took you to get this piece done from start to finish. Other than that, excellent job. Like I said before, again, maybe some I'm gonna keep adding to it, some quality pieces showcasing how you got this boot done. There's some excellent stuff here. That's gonna be how you present it, how you showcase, how you accomplish this character, right? Answer as much questions when showcasing your portfolio as you possibly can. Because if you show me that you understand scan data and you retopologized it and polished it to a certain level, now when I'm in an interview, I'm aware that you know this, right? Now I'm not just questioning, and you're kind of speeding up the workflow for you. Now you're getting into a little bit more minute details rather than secondary actions that you can help an interviewer solve from the get-go. So great stuff, awesome work. I'll keep an eye on your portfolio just so I can just see how you're improving and growing over time. Again, your next step is going to be super high fidelity detailing, which you definitely have an eye for it, and you can just take it to the next step, right? Never think that you're taking too long on a piece. If you're like, oh my god, why am I focusing on this one stitch when I have this whole character to worry about? Sometimes that one stitch really does matter. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes you can get too close to a piece, but for the most part, I think you can take it to the next level. So great stuff, awesome work, and I hope this helped. I hope all of these critiques helped along the way, and I could just see you killing it from here on out. So awesome stuff, and take care.